because she felt like just singing that song, actually just hearing it, makes her a better messenger. She's a fan of the one verse in particular. If you hear the song I sing, you will understand. You hold the key to love and fear, all in your trembling hand. Just one key unlocks them both. It's there at your command. It's so clear and the imagery is fantastic, she says. In our uncertainty, in our not fully knowing, we are still holding so much power and choosing to learn by love or to learn by fear as we go. And I just love how this verse puts it back in our courts as individuals. So we choose to love or fear every time. Another day. Just breathe. These words entered my head as I woke up 4 days prior to the presidential election, which was a very high stress, I think, time for a lot of us. Those words are from a song by a group called Telepop Music that was released in 2001, and I hadn't heard it for a really long time. And when I considered what these words were saying, they kind of brought me this comfort. Another day. Just breathe. These words for me say, every day we'll meet people who agree with us and those who don't. It's just the way things are. And if you just breathe, consciously breathe, you can allow it to be that way without feeling the need to control it. While we sleep, dreams may come. It's been said that our dreams are our subconscious mind sending us visual messages to help us become aware of things that our conscious mind won't allow. Our conscious mind knows what it knows and may be quick to react negatively to anything that contradicts it. If we write down our dreams and think honestly about them, they will shed light on all sorts of things and help us become a more well-balanced person. So when we are awake, breathing can help us get to that state, if we let it, and it will give us an opportunity to think before we react. And the most important part, or rather the part that really matters to my talk today, is that there's a small portion of black contained in the white and a small circle of white contained in the black. Without that part of the symbol, it could be interpreted that the yin and the yang are opposing forces that exist outside of each other. The inclusion of each color inside the other shows us that true balance can only be found when there's this little portion of the other side held within. This is an ancient symbol that comes to us from classical Chinese science, medicine, especially when you're confronted by someone whose ideas do not reflect your own. There may be this feeling you need to argue with them, present your thoughts, and make them kind of see the light and come over to your side. This way of thinking, as I've discovered, and perhaps some of you, doesn't really work very well. More than likely, the person with opposing views feels just as passionate about their ideas as you and will not be won over by whatever information you present. This is a road I've been down. So no matter how clever that video I forwarded or how compelling this podcast you heard may be, they'll probably have just as much evidence to counteract whatever you may bring to the table. Studies have proven that people rarely, if ever, change their mind based on things someone tells them or emails them. It usually only happens when an individual is open to change already and discovers the information in their own way, on their own terms. So, what to do in this situation? I recommend the square breathing we did in our time of centering. Doing this breathing exercise will help you stay centered and calm. It's so powerful that it's used by military personnel in stressful situations to help them remain calm during combat. I've got clients who work in medicine, and they say it's great to help them keep calm as well in the ER. So for us, instead of reacting to these opposing views, it will help you to listen. Listening to these opposing views does not make you compliant. I found that if I listen to people with ideas I don't agree with, if I don't react at all or give them an answer that only tells them I heard what they said without agreeing, then they often let it go. Often these people just want others to support what they already know, and if you don't give them that, they may realize that you don't echo their views and you can move on to other topics. If, however, you choose to let them know you do not agree with them, then a disagreement may follow that can be hard to recover from. Focusing on breathing will give you something to focus on instead of how frustrated you may be with their opinion or the outrage you may feel, especially if they share something that you know is definitely not true. Another day. Just breathe. When I considered these words, they brought me so much comfort. These words that seem to come from those precious, magical moments at the end of our sleep, but before being completely awake, helped me set a new tone for the day. Really made me think about breathing. The yin-yang reminds us that in this world, true balance is met when both sides are equal. Each side holds a piece of the other inside of itself. It's a very powerful symbol, and if we consider it, it can help us not only consider our own ideas and thoughts about the world, but also that there are a lot of people that hold an opposing view, and it's not about who's right and wrong. It's about both sides resting in the knowledge that their side is right for them. But the other side is thinking the same thing. If we can begin to listen to the other side, knowing that we won't change our mind, but still just listening, then it's enough to keep that opposing view, that yang to your yin, inside it without consuming you. It can exist in you without conquering your heartfelt feelings about things. It'll just remind you that we're all one. We are all connected. And we all want the same things, even if we feel differently about what type of journey we need to take in order to get there. Another really important part of the yin-yang concept is about ease. When I say I mean ease, it's about your ideas and your actions. Sometimes as we go about doing something, we run into some kind of roadblock, some unexpected occurrence, or someone trying to shut you down or stop you from doing what you're doing. It can be tempting at these times to force your will in a situation, to make it happen regardless, kind of double down, push harder. Have you ever tied a double knot in your shoelace and forgot when you went to untie your shoes? You just grabbed that lace and pulled, then you remember, oh yeah, I did a double knot. I need to undo that second knot before I pull the lace. But maybe if I just pull one more time, and then what happens? The knot gets tighter. In the yin and yang principles, the thing to do when you hit these roadblocks is slow down. Undo that second knot first, and then untie your shoe with ease. Just like a closed lane on the road, you don't knock down the cones and the electric sign, keep going in that lane since it's the one you've been traveling in. You slow down. You put your blinker on, you go around it. You can get back in that lane shortly and be on your way. If you go head on to the roadblock, you'll crash. Another example of this is from my experience doing massage. When I find a muscle with a tension knot, it's sometimes a trick to get the body to let it go. If I go right to the center, right to the heart of that tension knot, it's really hard. I mean, a tension knot can be really, really hard. And it can be it can be difficult to get it to let go. And I can press with using all my might, and there might be some relief. But this process can be very uncomfortable for the client, and sometimes it doesn't even yield any results. The knot is just as hard when I started. I found that if I trace the edges of the tension and go slowly inside those borders, going gradually to the center, moving in slowly as it melts on the outside, going gradually to the center, pressing on the sides for a moment, then moving to a different part of the sides, moving around the tension, eventually the knot will almost literally melt. The dive into the center technique, as I've said, will give some relief, but my technique with attention to the borders will not only be a much easier experience for the client, but will ultimately be much more effective. But this process of easing into the tension gradually, that makes me successful. It's like being in a discussion with someone you disagree with. You could go full force and say, I do not agree with you, and here's why. And you'll get the same results I get in my body work. It'll be uncomfortable for that speaker, and you'll probably feel uncomfortable too, and it'll probably not change their opinion. On the other hand, if you practice the square breathing, listen, then say something to let them know that you heard them, like, I can tell this issue means a lot to you, or, yes, I've heard many people talk about this, or there is quite a bit of information out there on this subject, and see how they respond. Deborah told a story a week or two ago about a man who came, and she was telling me, he was telling her that what we were doing here was wrong, and she made the space for him to listen. I hope that maybe some of you were here, and it was, I thought that was very inspiring that she listened. She didn't give in. She didn't say, "Oh no, we're doing it wrong," but she listened, and everything was fine, and she got to talk to him a little bit too. So you'll know right away if you want to continue based on their response after you say those kinds of things. And just knowing they've been heard will be enough for most, and they may drop it after that. And then if they respond gently to you and maybe even ask your opinion, and you have this opening to continue the discussion and see if maybe you can each learn something about each other's opinion, ease is a crucial aspect of the yin-yang concept. Color is another place where you can see this happening. This is actually a really good way to explain balance. Bruce and I have a really amazing garden. We really like gardening. And we've been doing it for a really long time, and this is a place where I really have seen this happen. This was the best example I could find of balance that it dawned on me very slowly. When Bruce and I started our garden many years ago, we had this idea about this whole hill that slopes up from the back of our house. It creates a perfect canvas to look at when you're in our sunroom. We decided that we would plant all blue flowers on this hill, blue bachelor's buttons, blue vinca, blue delphinium, blue everything. They began to bloom, and it was a completely blue hill. They were pretty, but we agreed that something wasn't quite right. And one day, someone gave us a pink annual. I think it was like a snapdragon. And we thanked them, but we were both wondering what we're going to do with it. We only wanted blue flowers in our garden. But it was a thoughtful gift, and we decided to plant it on our blue hill. It was evening when we put it in, and we didn't really get a chance to see it. But the next morning, I looked out on that blue hill and was thrilled to find out that it looked much bluer to me suddenly. I thought it was a sunny day at first, but when I went outside to take some photos, I realized that seeing that one spot of pink among those blue flowers helped my eyes to see them blue more easily. It intensified the blue and even became beautiful itself, being this interruption, what we created, which was, a bit of a one note with so much blue. It was surprising me because I thought I was not a fan of the color pink. We tried a spot of orange next, and then red, and then yellow. Each color we added made the sea of blue look deeper, and every color we added seemed to give us this particular quality to the overall effect that wasn't there beforehand. So we were convinced that we wanted this purely blue garden, but the small inclusion of other colors was just a thing to help us see even more blue and realize how beautiful other colors were. Letting go of the it's gotta be blue or it's gotta go mentality helped us to make a much more appealing garden because it was more balanced. Like our pure blue garden, it can be tempting to think, I only want this one kind of person in my life that thinks exactly like I do. But in many ways, all people have so much more in common than you might think. I saw this ad for that New Zealand posted. And it wasn't really an ad, it was called A Message from New Zealand, and it was great. It's worth Googling on YouTube if you want, where they asked a whole bunch of people this question: if you could encourage the world to do one thing, what would it be? And the answers made me really happy. I'm going to share a few with you. I'm not going to share them all. There was too many. But they were people of all ages, all genders, as well as different nationalities, and they said all these very basic things that I think everyone would agree on. Listen to others. Look at what's going on around you and see what you can do about it. Don't pollute the earth. Take care of the animals you love. Know your neighbors and be part of the community. Live happy. Believe in yourself. And this one, I really like this one. Seek the treasure of your heart and bow to no one but the loftiest of mountains. It's been said that if everyone from New Zealand or from your own neighborhood was to be given a poster board and a magic marker and asked to write down everything they want out of life, almost everyone will write down the same things, with one or two things being different. No one in the ad said they'd be happy to see someone locked up. No one said they'd be happy to exclude someone from our country based on their spiritual affiliation. No one said they'd be happy to see Black or Asian people discriminated against. No one said they'd be happy to see women marginalized or paid less than men. It just got me thinking that so much of what makes us unhappy are ideas and concepts that are fed to us by parts of the sensational media, and if we're in the right frame of mind, it could be fertile ground for our fears to grow. Fear and anger can be kind of like types of food, types of energy, and it can become an addiction. Chemicals are released in your body. Every time you get angry, you're scared, the way some of these stories do, and your body becomes used to that rush of chemicals. So you crave more, and you watch more. But then remember, it's always your choice how much you allow in. It's all in your trembling hand. Left to our own thoughts, would we all spend less time trying to convince others that our side is right and their side is wrong, and more time trying to make those things happen that really make us happy? So many of us want the exact same thing. Wouldn't it be nice if we could all just spend the day doing just those things? So when you have moments in which you feel like your blue garden couldn't possibly be defiled by one orange flower, or you're surrounded by people whose opinion do not reflect your own, just breathe. Taking a moment to breathe will give you that time to think and not react, the opportunity to listen instead of react. I'm just going to finish with this little story. about a really powerful thing that happened to me as a result of using the square breathing. When I was about 9 years old, my family lived in California and very near to a good friend of my father's. And during that time, I met Mr. Vogt on several occasions. The first time was at his house north of where we lived. When we arrived at his house, we admired it and his pool, and my brother and I were really happy when we were told we could go to his game room off the kitchen. We walked in and saw a dartboard and a pool table. We were excited to play pool, and we each selected a cue and turned to play. Just then, Mr. Vogt was suddenly standing in the room. He's really tall. He took the cue out of my brother's hand and said, "Listen to me." And then he stopped and just looked at us. I felt like we were in trouble for some reason. Then he gently tapped the surface of the pool table with the cue and said, "If either of you pokes a hole in my pool table, your father will have to pay me $650 to replace it, so be careful." After which he left the cue on the table, walked out. My brother and I looked at each other and we were kind of nervous, and we played this very cautious game of pool. And we just played one and kind of stopped, and we were like, we better not play anymore. We were really afraid of messing the table up, so we stopped. A few years later, at our own home, Mr. Vogt and his wife came to stay with us so they could all go to a company party together. I had just had oral surgery a few days previous, so I was sleeping on the couch downstairs in the den. They returned from the party and entered the kitchen. They weren't worried about waking me up in the nearby room since I was taking pain meds that sort of knocked me out. I heard them in their post-party good moods, clearly having had a great time, chatting about how much fun it had been. For my birthday that year, I'd received a bright red beanbag chair. They were really popular back then. I was sat in it for TV watching, and I'd store it underneath the coffee table. Mr. Vogt saw the bright red bag tucked under the table, and he dragged it out. "Hey, watch this," he said, and he let his entire adult self fall into my beanbag chair as hard as he could. On the third fall, I could see the little beans that had all been inside now flying out of the hole he had just made. "Look at that, look what I did," he said and laughed. Kind of let my pain meds lull me back to sleep as I recalled how insistent he'd been and that I respect the items at his house. Later, my mother bought me some bright red tape to repair the chair, but it was never really the same. Every time I sat in it, 3 or 4 little beads would fly out and remind me of the hole. As the years rolled on, every time my dad would mention him, my thought was always, "Oh yeah, the guy who destroyed my chair on purpose, even though I respected his belongings." And this went on, actually, until really recently. Mr. Vogt is German, and his family lived in a small town called Wuppertal in Germany, just as World War II was starting. He wrote a book about his experiences during this time. My father's been encouraging me to read it for years now, and I kept thinking about this kind of a grudge I'd been holding about that whole beanbag thing. It was just really sticking with me. And I couldn't get myself interested in the book. A few weeks back, I was practicing the square breathing, and right as I was finishing, the idea of reading the book came into my mind. So I went with it and I read the book. I've never heard this perspective before of innocent German citizens surviving the effects of this horrible war inside Germany. When Mr. Vogt's father entered the Nazi army to fight in the war, his family was very excited. They'd believed all the fascist propaganda that the government had been promoting and were very proud at first. As the war progressed, they were relocated to a small fishing village in the north. They got little information from the outside world, but all they heard was more propaganda about Germany winning and how just their cause was. When Germany started losing and the Russians began to advance on the small town, German authorities blamed Mr. Vogt's family for it, claiming that the small hand-cranked record player they had was actually a communication device that had been giving the Russians information. The town was told that they would have to be executed for their betrayal. The rest of the town was not in support. They knew his family would never do such a thing, but the authorities planned to make an example out of them. So they lined them up against a wall, and they were just about to shoot them. But just at the moment they were about to do this, the Russians showed up, and the German soldiers fled. Some of the German residents were terrified of the Russians coming, and they didn't know what was going to happen, and they tried to leave. It was winter, and they tried to use this frozen lake to travel across with horses, wagons, and all of their possessions. When the Russians arrived and saw the retreating Germans, they turned their cannons on the lake, and they fired into the frozen lake, and all of the people escaping were drowned. The plight of those who stayed behind went from bad to worse as food became incredibly scarce. The Russians were taking all of the food for their soldiers and leaving little to none for the Germans. Russian soldiers would routinely invade homes and take whatever they wanted of their possessions. And in one heartbreaking chapter, Mr. Vogt and his sister were forced to watch as the soldiers brutally attacked his mother. The Russians eventually gave control of the small town to the Poles, who took up residence in all the homes and farms in the town. The people who had lived there became homeless and had to fend for themselves. By the time Mr. Vogt and his mother and sister were relocated back to their hometown in Germany, they literally only had the clothes on their backs, which they had to surrender as soon as they were handed over to American forces by the Russians because they were covered in lice. So he had absolutely nothing by the time he got back to his home.